Hey everybody, Aaron Herman of the Open Scroll here, and it's good to be back with you here on the first day, the 11th month on the Lord's calendar. And as we're recording this, we're just getting ready to tick over into the second day of the month here shortly. So I'm going to make mention of that. And as always, I'm here with Bob Schlenker.
Hello and welcome. And what we've got for you today is going back into John, the Gospel of John, chapters 18 and 19. And we're going to really pick up where we left off. Now, we previously covered this part right here. I'll expand that again. And we have some left to go before we finish up this particular unit. And we've got this part about Barabbas that we're going to be giving our attention to today. And we've got this, which is going to take some time because it's pretty complex. So we're not going to get into that today. And this last part down here. Obviously, this is a four-part parallelism. This would be the A and A prime, the B and B prime, C and C prime, and the D and D prime. So today we're giving our attention to the B and B prime. So I'm going to enlarge that and make it easier to see. I'm going to collapse these. Now in John 18, it ends and turns into 19 right here in this section where we're dealing with Barabbas. And it's woven together. And there's a very interesting observation that needs to be made about Barabbas. We've talked about Judas and how Judas is a type of the lawless one, right? And how he is featured on this 13th day of the first month. And so he's a major player. And what is it about him? Well, he is a type of the Antichrist, the beast, the lawless one. And it's his revelation that's being pictured. And now we have yet another picture that is pretty special of the same character, the lawless one, but the modeling is done by another guy. It's Jesus Barabbas. And you may think, well, why is Bob saying Jesus Barabbas? Well, we need to take a look at that. Even in Wikipedia, which is not really a place to go for a whole lot of truth, because oftentimes they'll completely avoid the most significant parts. But here, what you can see is legitimate. And I'm just going to read this. Barabbas' name appears as Barabbas in the Greek text of the Gospels. It is derived ultimately from the Aramaic Barabba, son of the father. That's what that means. Bar is son, Abba, father. Some ancient manuscripts of Matthew 27, 16, and 17 have the full name of Barabbas as Jesus Barabbas, and this was probably the name as originally written in the text, and was probably scrubbed. But is it really Jesus Barabbas? Well, on one hand, we have the true Jesus, son of the Father, Yeshua. On the other hand, we have a counterfeit, Jesus, son of the Father. And so what we see in this situation when Jesus is being tried is that one is offered instead of the other, and one is chosen instead of the other to be released. And so in this, we have quite an interesting revelation. So knowing that Barabbas is actually Jesus Barabbas makes it pretty obvious that Since that happened on the 13th day of the first month, we have yet another type of the revealing of the lawless one on the 13th day of the first month. And our interest right now is particularly in the reset of time. And so we see that this Jesus Barabbas character is significant. And he's a counterfeit Messiah. And so when we read about it in John 18 and 19, we're going to have to understand how it's Jesus Barabbas that's being offered here. And in the context, I'm going to scroll down here. What we have is woven into this scenario with Barabbas being offered to be released instead of Jesus. There's a Keystone Pattern evident because of the dynamic of what happens with Pilate. So in Luke 23, verses 20 to 25, I'm going to read this part of it. Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again, but they kept on calling out, saying, "Crucify him, crucify him." And he said to them the third time, "Why, what evil has this man done? I have found in him no guilt demanding death. Therefore, I will punish him and release him." But they were insistent with loud voices, asking that he be crucified. And their voices began to prevail, and Pilate pronounced sentence that their demand be granted. And he released the man they were asking for, who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, but he delivered Jesus to their will. 3 times Pilate appeals to the crowd, but there's no change. Then he makes one more appeal for absolution with a token gesture, washing his hands of the matter, according to pattern. In that 4th instance in the series, he releases the prisoner they demand, Jesus, Son of the Father. Now, the Keystone Pattern should be really evident, and as kind of a validation that we're dealing with time, he washes his hands with, no doubt, water, right? Water as time. And washing his hands is a very interesting symbol in that regard. And so, again, we're talking about the reset of time involved with this Keystone Pattern. So when we go into this end of chapter 18, this is where we see it spliced together with 19, because you can't really ignore the way that the structure unfolds here. So I'm going to walk you through that a little bit, and I invite you to explore it for yourself to see really just how obvious the matchup is, and to really get a hold of how it's this revealing of the lawless one that's in play on the 13th day of the first month, and how this is so notably now in this season dealing with the time of the reset back into the past. So, Aaron, would you read these for us? Would you read these 2 sections highlighted in blue, 1838b through 19:5, and then 19:12 through 14a?
Sure. After he had said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him. But you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews?" They cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and arrayed him in a purple robe. And they came up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour.
Thank you. Now, in these sections, each one divides into two. And we see from the blue up above that one part is repeated in the other. And if we ignore this down here for now, how was it repeated? In the same order. It's a parallelism. Now we've got single lines down in this section, and then we've got a pair of 4-line structures. And I don't have a correspondence between these two that I'm hovering over up above or these two down below. But you'll notice that the patterns are similar. These are both 1 line. These are both 4 lines. Let's take a look at the correspondence on this level. And so we have the bringing out in view. And also we have finding no guilt in him. And so the matchup there is fairly obvious. And in this section, we have Jesus coming out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, which are put on him here in verse 2 of chapter 19. So those correspondences are fairly obvious. So when we look at this top section, these 4 lines, these two are repeated in these two. It's a chiasm. They're repeated in reverse order. So we have time as a focus here. After he had said this in sequence, in time, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him." Now Barabbas was a robber. And so we see, in contrast, this Jesus Barabbas was guilty, clearly guilty. His guilt was known. He had basically been tried and convicted. But here, no guilt is found in this Jesus, Son of the Father. Now in the inner 2 lines we have, "But you have a custom that I should release 1 man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews?" And of course, this was a big deal, a huge deal in the previous section, right? That Jesus is the King of the Jews. And so he asks if he wants them to release him. And they cry out again, and they're not disputing at this point the King of the Jews. They've already done that. But they cry out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." So they make it very clear about their choice. Which man? Not this man, Barabbas. Now in verses 1 through 3, chapter 19, we have another chiasm. "Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him and struck him with their hands." Well, there's flogging, striking. Kind of an obvious matchup. I've colored it in blue. In the inner pairing, "And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him," the soldiers again, "saying, 'Hail, King of the Jews.' So they dressed him up as befitting a king of sorts, according to their mockery. And then they're continuing their mockery with their words, 'Hail, King of the Jews,' which of course, they didn't accept him as King of the Jews. This was simply mockery. So those are fairly obvious, and it's fairly obvious that they match up to these, so that structure should be plain. Now in this section down below, we have, again, a doubling, and in this doubling, they correspond to what I've got highlighted up above in a fairly obvious way. From then on, verse 12 begins, and that deals with the timing of the sequence after he had said this, and now Barabbas was a robber. And the topic here is the release of this man. But the Jews cried out, "If you release this man." And of course, verse 39, chapter 18, that's what that's all about. So the correspondence there is fairly obvious, right? And then down here in 13:14a, it's about bringing him out. In verse 4, Jesus is brought out, and then he's brought out again in 13a. And when we take a look at how each section is, we have a chiasm and a chiasm again. So the structural symmetry is pretty obvious. Now it's a very different structure because this one's woven together with a parallelism at the first level, right? And this one, there's no such thing. It's strictly a pair of chiasms, like this top part. And so I'm going to hide that part so we have a undistracted view as we look at this section down here. From then on, everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. And so this is an interesting pairing. And why would we pair up those two lines? Well, the rest of the context makes it obvious. So there's something that's not so obvious going on with this pairing. Let's look at the inner pairing. Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you're not Caesar's friend." That's pretty obvious, dealing with the releasing. And why do I separate it out to make it like a chiasm? Because it really does match up. And their tact has changed. It was something different, and now they've just, not really randomly, but they've changed their tact. And now they're trying to put some pressure on Pilate by making him want to not be seen as someone who is not Caesar's friend himself. So they've put a different kind of pressure on Pilate. So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out. That's all it took. Now they've got their puppet in play. So down here in this chiasm, 13a matches up to 14a. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. And you might say, we're dealing with timing. Yes, that's dealing with timing. And you could say that 14a matches up also to 12a. Yep. And there is more going on in the structure here that I haven't called out with either comments or highlighting. But this is yours to explore and to see what the Lord has for you. I'm just giving you an invitation and a little introduction at this point. So when Pilate heard these words, again, this is time language, and there's a sequence. And so that does have to do with the timing here. And this is all about the timing, identifying exactly when it is. And in this middle pairing of the chiasm, and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement in an Aramaic, Gabbatha. So this is the judgment seat there. And being a stone pavement is interesting because stones and time, right? Water and stones, time. Pilate will wash his hands, right? Right about this, in this place, perhaps. Water and stones. Aaron?
In verse 14 there, it tells us, along with that, it's about the 6th hour, which doesn't that make it noon, around noontime, 12 o'clock? So
Yes, it does. It would be in our analog clock language 12. About 12. Time. So the scenario here should seem pretty familiar, right? Now, I've got some other cross structure highlighted on the level of the lines. And I've noted in the past that, when you get it right, when you get down to the granular nuts and bolts of a symmetrical structure, there are several levels that will often appear. And for one thing, it validates that, yep, this is it, you got it. And for another, it just opens up all kinds of insight through the network of connections. So I pointed out this basic level of the 5th column, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Between the B and B prime of these 4 parts in the parallelism. And now let's see what I've got. And there's further correspondence here down below, which is the same as these two. Why have I done that? Did I make a mistake? No. And as you track with the themes, you'll see that this is also legitimate. Now, when I go to this next level of the bars, I have no correspondence whatsoever beyond local context. However, now when I step out to the level of the lines, you can see that I've got 12A highlighted. Now, as I hover my mouse down, you'll see 12B, 12C, 12D, and now here it jumps down to the bottom, and that's a remnant from a previous part of the study, but I made a connection there. And one of the things that you'll see here is that in this particular correspondence between verses 38b through 40, the ending of chapter 18, it does correspond on a line-by-line basis with what's in 1912. And I'll make a point, 12, yeah, we know what that's about, right? It's a time number. And yet we see the time stuff down here where the emphasis is given in the 13th and 14th verses. But this is not really so much about any kind of a 12 and 13 as it is the rest of the correspondence. And look at these lines that I've highlighted. After he said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, I find no guilt in him. From then on. But you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So, do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews? Pilate sought to release him. They cried out again, not this man, but Barabbas. But the Jews cried out, if you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Now, Barabbas was a robber. That's his crime. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. Well, that's their version of Yeshua's crime, and the one that really finalized it. It was already determined that Barabbas was a robber. And here, this is something of a false accusation, since Jesus's authority and kingdom was not of this realm. This is what did the job and got Jesus convicted. This is Barabbas. This is his crime that he was convicted for. So these different levels that we're pointing out, from one perspective, there's not anything super profound going on that's immediately apparent. But when you put it all together and you set this in the context and realize that what Pilate was doing there was exactly according to the Keystone Pattern, which has to do with the chronology of the end. It has to do with the counting of Shemitah from the celestial sign of 1991. It has to do with not just the Keystone Pattern, but also the reset of time. Pilate washed his hands to pretty much divorce himself from any accountability for what was his part in this. And so he was trying to basically reset, right? To justify, make it as though it had never happened. Washed his hands, all the dirtying of his hands in the doing of this deed and bringing a conviction against a man in whom he found no guilt. He is resetting that back to the beginning to a point where he's got clean hands. So this being on the stone, right? The stone pavement. Think about it. What is the point of knowing little tidbits like that? Is it just random facts that are being thrown out there? Well, we haven't found anything to be random. Everything is done for a purpose, and the structure is there for a reason. And these things are woven together in this sequence of events, all dealing with the 13th day of the first month. It's not just about the revealing of the lawless one in the day when things finally unfold in the resurrection season. This is also for how they're unfolding now in this season, as we're being prepared for what's to come in that season, in this season that's now before the reset. So if this doesn't make sense to you, you might want to go back and look at some of our more fundamental introductory versions of our descriptions of structure and how it works. And in particular, go back to the beginning of where we started with John 17 and work your way through up into this part. And we've got more to go. We've got more to go with this section, and you can kind of get in advance and look through on your own if you like. And we're going to go into some of the other content. We've also got John 19, 16b through 30, which is a unit, a single unit. And then we've got John 19, 31 through 42, which closes out the chapter, which is another single unit. So these are all prepared in advance. You can go explore them on your own. There is a lot there. Now, I've got a couple of verses loaded up here, and they're very relevant. If you understand about the things that we decode in media, our understanding of those things really stems from our work in the Bible. And so the devil, he doesn't make up stuff on his own. He gets it because of what he's seen in heaven. He's taken secrets of heaven, not the most worthwhile, best ones, but nonetheless, he has the secrets of heaven that he is allowed to exploit. And so in verse 1 of chapter 13, and Aaron, what is it again about 13 exactly?
13, that is a number that signifies mastery of time, also connected here with the beast. So mastery of time and the beast.
Yep. For a long time, I identified 13 as the rebel Lord beast because it deals with all three of those themes. And then we caught on finally to the mastery of time. And so these are layered up here. But certainly with regard to the mastery of time, we see a beast rising out of the sea. That's water as time. And this is a biblical metaphor. And so he's got 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 diadems on his horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it, the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of his heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast, and they worshiped the dragon, For he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" And in this season, we've been talking about the reset of time, pivoting on the revealing of the lawless one, the beast, is coming out of the sea. So should we not see something like this and then have it be interrupted? Well, I think so. I think we see a lot of chaos building in the world, and I think it's very likely, given that they've continued to rush headlong toward the acceptance of the beast. This seems appropriate to mention at this point, to keep it in our minds and to have it be something that, when we question what the meaning is of all these things we see, take it to the Lord in prayer. He can reveal to us those things that are very specific and relevant to what we need to know as this age wraps up. Now in chapter 17 of Revelation, we see some very specific time language. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss, which is typically a watery abyss, and go to destruction. So he was and is not. So why does it say and is not? Why doesn't it just say he was? Well, there's a reason for that. It's not for no reason. Something's being said, something's not being said. It's a very peculiar construction. And is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. That's a time thing, isn't it? Going way back. Will wonder when they see the beast, that he was, here we go again, and is not, and will come. What sense can be made of that? Here is the mind which has wisdom. We could use some of that. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And they are 7 kings. 5 has fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. That's a lot of time and sequence stuff, with a focus on 7s. Right? And we see that there's 7 mountains and 7 kings. So there's a dual symbolism applied to the 7 heads. They're one thing, and then they're another thing. Very interesting, right? And when we've talked about the reset of time, we talk about time being reset 7 years into the past. So think about it. This is resonating. And so the beast which was and is not, is himself also an 8th. Oh, so he was and is not and is himself also an 8th, like with the 7, because you got to have the 7 to get an 8th. So he's what? How do you make sense of this? And he goes to destruction. So we're circling back around and circling back around and circling back around, and very interesting. What do we make of that, Aaron?
And I find it also very interesting there in verse 8, that verse is bookended with the repeating of what we saw was and is not and is about to come up. And then they mention, will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. So they've repeated that, kind of a repeating of the time reset kind of modeling there, which is rather interesting there in verse 8.
And if you're curious at any point about what's involved with that, we've got Revelation 17 and 18, and we've done the structure on that. So this is what I've determined it is, and there may be more to it. I haven't revisited in a while, but these things are not random, and the correspondences are here for revelation. They're here to instruct us, to inform us. And as prophecies, which this clearly is, this is given in advance, not to be just a cryptic mystery that gives us something to wonder about forever. It's to be fulfilled, and in advance, revelation will be given as it's opened up to us. So while it may be opaque to some, it's not completely opaque. And when you consider what Revelation 17, 8, 9, 10, and 11 means, with all this strange language, with sequencing and timing, without the reset of time, I can really make no sense of that whatsoever. But if you factor in the reset of time, it makes sense. Bill Clinton, he was somebody. Now, not so much. Pope Benedict, yeah, he's still around too. He was really Pope. Now, not so much. But when time is reset, if we go back to 2012, even 7 years from now into 2013, Bill Clinton, still a player. Pope Benedict, still a player. And we look at these things and we wonder about how exactly they're going to manifest in this particular season prior to the reset. We have some answers, we have some insight. There's so much more that we don't know, but we're very excited to continue to press in and to learn more and to be able to share these things with people who truly have an ear to hear. And we get very excited about that. Aaron's going to close out with a passage of scripture that the Lord gave him for today. Aaron?
Thank you. This is 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through chapter 5, verse 9. Therefore, we do not lose heart, but though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory, far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. For we know that if the earthly tent, which is our house, is torn down, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For indeed in this house we groan, longing to be clothed with our dwelling from heaven, inasmuch as we, having put it on, will not be found naked. For indeed, while we are in this tent, we groan, being burdened, because we do not want to be unclothed, but to be clothed, so that what is mortal will be swallowed up by life. Now he who prepared us for this very purpose is God, who gave to us the Spirit as a pledge. Therefore, being always of good courage, and knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We are of good courage, I say, and prefer rather to be absent from the body and to be at home with the Lord. Therefore, we also have as our ambition, whether at home or absent, to be pleasing to him.
Awesome. And yep, we're still absent from the Lord in one perspective, but yet from another, he's with us. And so we take comfort in that. And would we rather be at home with the Lord? Oh, yes. No question about that. We know he has a great purpose in mind until then. And so together with those of you who continue to hang in there, persisting, enduring, here we are together. And thank you, Lord. Bye-bye.